Africa and indeed Nigeria have not been spared from the economic and political consequences of COVID-19 pandemic.
And migration, which normally helps to keep the global economy floating, is now on hold because of COVID-19, which presently affects the overall economic conditions of migrants. At the moment, hundreds of countries have now implemented coronavirus-related travel restrictions as well as border shutdowns, creating an unprecedented impact on mobility.
Well, here in Nigeria, after a meeting with the state governors by President Muhammadu Buhari, the Nigerian governors have agreed to ban movement between states for 2 weeks as part of efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19, also stating that only essential services will be permitted to move around. The decision was taken at the 6th teleconference meeting of the Nigerian Governors Forum NGF, which held on Wednesday.
The NGF chairman and Governor of Ekiti State, Kayode Fayemi, said the action became necessary because of the increasing evidence of community transmission of coronavirus in order to strengthen coordinated implementation of necessary public health recommendations across the state. The governor also resolved to set up COVID-19 committees at the regional level, headed by the State Commissioners of Health. So joining us now is Enitan Tunde-Ibironke, a legal practitioner, communication for development and migration expert. It's a pleasure to have you once again, Enitan. Enitan, I just want to go straight to it and let's have the conversation. Enitan, is there a need to, come out with a statement again that there is a ban on interstate travel when, as I speak, the motor parks are shut? I can't even take a bus to Ibadan as I speak. So where is the ban coming from? What's the need for it?
Well, basically, we all know how COVID-19 is spread, and we know that there's a need to flatten the curve and to create social distancing. Although now WHO has said that it's actually about creating physical distancing and not social distancing. So the need is to be able, there's a need to implement the travel ban in Nigeria.
Okay, so as you stated there, that the need is because we ought to maintain social distancing and the likes. But a lot of people will say, with the lockdown going on in Lagos, the FCT and some other parts, people cannot move around. And a lot of people argue with you that the people that are even moving around are spreading this are those in the top echelon of society. A clear case was the index case in Kano that traveled with his bodyguards. They cleared the road for him, got into Kano, went to a Jummah prayer, and voila, the rest is history, as they say. So why don't they talk to people like that? Not us, the citizens that are already debilitated by the lockdown already.
Well, yes, you're very, very accurate. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in Nigeria is a case where the top echelon of society are the ones who are actually violating every principle that was said. It was interesting to look at the video that just played now at the Governors Forum. And I was wondering if social distancing or physical distancing had been thrown to the wind in that particular meeting. But then, what are we going to say? The laws have been put, the instructions have been put in place. And hopefully what we're trying to do with this is to minimize the effect of the damage that has already been done. We already can see that the fact that Nigeria as a country did not implement lockdown policies immediately, and that the people at the top echelon of government did not think it pragmatic to actually believe that their actions could have ripple effects, and we're seeing the consequences today. However, hopefully, if citizens are able to overlook the excesses and the consequences of our government and what the top echelon people are doing, we might be able to actually see a flattening of the curve in Nigeria. Hopefully that's what we're going to. How do we flatten the curve? It's just measures that governments across the world have to put in place.
Well, Anita, just to quickly correct that, the Governors Forum met through teleconferencing, and the visuals you saw were actually from the archives. But my question, let's step away from Nigeria and look at the global migration. And how much of an impact is COVID-19 going to have? I mean, it is inevitable it will have some sort of impact with closed borders, travel bans, restrictions, and some people even turning back migrants. But how much of an effect, how big an impact would this be for global migration?
Well, for global migration, the impact is going to be critical because you have the world's most vulnerable people at this point in time in terms of migrants, asylum seekers, who are going to be stuck in a situation where they're not able to enter into European countries or to countries of destination. But at the same time, they're going to end up being vulnerable and passing the virus around themselves. So I find that as at 26th of March this year, over 180 countries, like I said, had passed travel restrictions due to COVID-19. However, in each of the migrant camps across Italy, Greece, and other European countries, you have had increasing number of coronavirus cases because the camps are overcrowded. However, and so looking at that, in terms of migration, there's a desperation that is coming up now. So you're finding that people, the most vulnerable people, who are asylum seekers, irregular migrants, people that are looking for a way of life, who are escaping, are now stuck in the middle. They're actually the ones who are probably going to be the foot soldiers, the victims, the final victims of this virus in terms of migration and travel issues.
Definitely. As you've rightfully mentioned, COVID-19 is definitely a threat to these vulnerable groups. But then if we think about these migrants who are cut off because they were, traveling from their homes to their final destination and having cut off from, support and these informal sectors in which they used to make a living from day to day, what are the legal ramifications of something like this? Because they are, migrating and they are stuck in some of these camps, which at this point, social distancing doesn't necessarily exist. So when you look at it, they aren't necessarily protected by any law, and they are not protected even while they are in these camps.
Yes, now it's a very dicey situation because you have Human Rights Watch and a few other human rights organizations that are raising issues about the rights and protection of migrants. However, countries, destination countries, are also saying that they have the right to protect their citizens. And you have to also, so what is happening is pretty much a situation where the migrants are already coming in to seek refuge or to seek some sort of work or to find some sort of succor. But the countries that are going to have to implement policies that will protect citizens. It's like saying Nigeria now, we have people who are flooding into Nigeria to escape from or to work in Nigeria, but neighboring countries. And our government has had to close our borders because allowing people to come in unchecked and without any measures to actually be able to contain any of the issues they can bring in is actually not just it's beyond an economic crisis. It's actually a health crisis for any country. And so the law in this particular situation is seeing something that has been unprecedented. And unfortunately, the most that can happen is to look at if any of their human rights have actually been violated. And in this situation, countries are putting up the excuses that they're protecting their citizens. That's what the common across board, when you hear all the reasons that have been given for the closure against migrants, that's what it is. And even in camps where you have about 5,000 people for a 1,000 capacity camp, they've had to, in France, they've had to actually evacuate people and move them around. But then there's nowhere to move them to because you can't bring them into the city centers because you're afraid of the spread. And already the camps have people who are already infected. So that's the challenge here.
How do you argue out the conversation as regards human rights and the ability for people to be able to move freely in this region? And I'd say this, a very clear case in point is those people that came in from Abidjan into Osun State. They brought in a lot of cases. And it was a word against mouth. And after that, Governor Oyetola even went further. He was one of the first persons to call for even a national lockdown because they came in and the cases just spiked. We all know how a lot of Ijigbo people stay back in Abidjan. They have a checkered history that spans the 1930s. But how do you make an argument for that? How do you also make an argument what's even happening in Hungary today, where Viktor Orban has gotten all executive powers to do everything? Sort of a dictatorial kind of power.
See, in this case, we have a pandemic, we have a crisis, and we're looking at the danger to the greater number of people as against its minority. No matter what it is in this situation, human rights is twofold. You're looking at human rights of migrants or asylum seekers, you're looking at the human rights of citizens. We have a right to be protected. We have a right to make sure that our health is not impinged on. And in this situation where you have the virus being carried by human beings and its contact and distance and proximity that brings it, a case of human rights now is going to be very dicey to push for migrants and asylum seekers. Because even if they were in their country of origin, they would have to actually exercise a lockdown. There's isolation, there's quarantine. And so it's pretty unfortunate that migrants are going to have to be caught in this kind of situation, but there's nothing that any government in the world can do. It was literally almost, should we say, unforeseen that it would happen this way, even though we have other evidence to contrary to that fact.
And I'd like to get your take on the longer-term impact of COVID-19 on future migration. Do you foresee a situation where local actors, migration lawyers such as yourself, now foster or reevaluate the inclusion of migrants in social cohesion and national inclusion of host countries? Or otherwise, what do you think would happen? Are we going to see a silver lining from this?
Well, we might see a silver lining from this, but then what is likely going to happen primarily at first is a lot of hostilities. You're going to find that pushback because ordinarily when we're looking at in discussions across board in terms of how we are going to relate as human beings, already we're getting very used to being away from other people. So we're getting used to a lot of our interaction being social by virtual, And so when it comes to migrants, there's already that sense of why are you in this space? So for migration lawyers and for migration discussants and advocates, it's going to be pretty tough to begin to make a case for migrants to be included. So would I say a silver lining? I am not exactly sure about the silver lining yet because it's a tough situation. We're already looking at the economic impact of COVID-19 on nations, and we're looking at the fact that migrants, unless we can make a case, migrants adding to the economic bottom line of countries in rebuilding and having skills add value to the economy. That's on it. The only other silver lining here might be for countries that have had highly depleted number of citizens. But even in that situation, it still boils down to the fact that will migrants that are coming in be able to add value and increase the economic condition of the countries that they're coming to? So it's coming down to a lot of facts and figures at the end of the day.
Well, the fear of refugees in crowded places and is fully justified as an outbreak, a context of this outbreak. But you rightfully said that at this point, the human rights of the citizens and the human rights of these migrants is something that is very dicey because governments need to protect their citizens. So my question to you is, who is going to protect these migrants? At what point do we start to put policies in place to make sure that there's an immediate protection for these migrants as well as these asylum seekers? Because it only takes one of these people getting out, if there already is an infection on the camp, for one person getting out to get into an already crowded city and infect those people. So are we looking at the migrants, even though they have no government that they are accountable to, who is looking out for them?
Well, that's a very good question. So what is happening now is that you're finding the international organization and human rights bodies making a case to governments to at least create, to make sure that the camps in themselves are hygienic, they're kept safe.
Enitan Tunde-Ibironke, I know you were about to make that point, but we need to go on a quick break. When we come back, you will land on your point. You're still watching the morning show here on Arise News. Join us again. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still joined by Enitan Tunde-Ibironke, a legal practitioner, communication for development and migration expert. Thank you for staying with us. Now, before the break, I was talking about policy-coordinated actions that need to be taken because we do know that these migrants, these asylum seekers, don't necessarily have any government responsible for them. And because of the current state of these camps, it's very possible to have an infected person mixed up with a citizen in the country that they currently stay. So who is responsible for making sure that they are receiving the right treatment and they are doing the right things?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I must say that it's a very unfortunate situation, which is one of the reasons why there's high advocacy against the issue of irregular migration, because by virtue of the decisions and actions of migrants, they put themselves in a position of being vulnerable and at risk already. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, there's now double jeopardy. Then it's a real situation of double jeopardy where they're citizenless, they're already in vulnerable positions, they don't have any entitlements. But what you're finding that a few states, and I mean, when I say states, I mean nations, have decided to, for instance, a few countries have decided to waive all they've given them some temporary citizenship at this point in time so they could have access to healthcare and to be able to also be able to at least be able to ameliorate the effects of coronavirus if they actually come in contact with anyone who's infected. However, you have organizations like United Nations High Commission for Refugees, you have IOM, which is International Organization for Migration, and a few others who are making a case for the rights of protections of migrants and asylum seekers. I put the two of them together because you find that most times you transit from a migrant to seeking asylum in the country you're coming from. However, like I have said earlier on, unfortunately, the conditions in most of the camps are really bad already. You have a situation where a lot of the residents of the camps are living in unhygienic and conditions. There are no bathrooms and no toilets. You have 5,000 people sharing a 1,000 capacity facility. So what is happening, as I said, is even within the camps, there's discrimination. In France, for instance, in one of the camps, where one of the people was suspected to have died of coronavirus, the camp residents protested and they set fire to the camp. Now, unfortunately, what happens in that situation? Who's going to come in and protect them? So to answer your question, because I could go on and on about this matter, it's going to be international bodies and countries, European countries are looking at ways in which they can help, which is one of the ways I mentioned, whereby citizen rights have been granted, temporary citizen rights have been granted to be able to allow migrants and asylum seekers be able to access some of the facilities and opportunities that they would have gotten if they had become fully integrated. And the other day, there was a video that went round about one of the countries where at least there was, once you had your records, there was some kind of stipend that was given to everyone to be able to get something to at least keep body and soul together. So that's really the most that can be done at this point in time. A lot of activities and actions will come up after the extinction of COVID-19 in terms of what rights what can we say, what rights are not done. But then again, you find that a few countries, Portugal, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, are likely to be fined, for actually not being able to take in their quota of migrants. But a lot of those things are probably going to be relaxed in light of the greater danger to citizens, like I rightly said at the beginning of our conversation. So I do hope that it's an ongoing conversation. It's something that needs to be looked into. The rights of migrants to be considered, but it's unfortunate that the whole world is experiencing a situation like this at this point in time. And there's really not much that can be done in terms of a formal protection or rights of migrants. It can only be left to country by country decisions, and that's based on how dangerous it will be for the countries in question and international bodies to stand up and say what suggestions can come up. But everybody is in a situation where they're just trying to keep their head above water.
I just want to come in here, and I want you to expatiate, because it's quite really important. We've got millions of them. I want you to expatiate on the rights of stateless people. It's really very important. They constitute a very, very important bulk, and it's a big problem. UNHCR is talking about that, other organizations. I also want you, to comment on this. Take, for instance, what can the African Union be doing to bolster this alliance and help a couple of African citizens in other African countries, to get aid and palliative? A clear case in point. We had the president of the Nigerian Union in South Africa here a couple of days ago, and he said that most of the palliatives that are shared out in South Africa, Nigerian citizens do not get them. And for me, that destroys the ethic of Ubuntu, the coming together of Africa, the Harambe ethic. It defeats that. How can they be sharing palliatives that Nigerians are not getting? And it's happening the same in other countries. I'm not sure the palliatives we are sharing, Nigerians are getting.
Well, you see, now let's say charity begins at home. So let's start with Nigeria, for instance. Now there's some palliative measures being shared and all. The first question to ask is, do you think that foreigners in Nigeria would actually say they're getting anything at all? Now, the second thing that I'm going to go to is one of the major points why the issue of statelessness, irregular migration, asylum seeking has been talked about so often, and why I've also been around a few times. Once you do not have any documentation in a particular country, how does any benefit get to you? You see, for African countries where we're not even high on documentation, so for instance, in Nigeria, we'll have our BVN or we have numbers, we have some form of identification, but which of those identification methods have been used to distribute anything? Now, in other countries where identification methods are very, very utilized, how do you expect people that do not have any identification to get palliative measures? The only way they can get anything at all will be through the camps, the detention centers. And so if you're not in a detention center or in an asylum processing center, there's nothing that can get to you. Do you understand? So in statelessness, that is the challenge with these things, which is where the only way, it's unfortunate that that's what the situation is, which is why there's the push and drive for saying, if you're going to move to another person's country, another country entirely, there must be a process where you can be identified. So that if anything, nobody envisaged a pandemic. But in this situation now, we're seeing really the reality of being stateless, being unidentified, and not actually being documented in another person's country.
Okay, Mrs. Ibironke, it's quite unfortunate because this pandemic does provide the world an opportunity to show empathy and solidarity, especially to these groups of people who are vulnerable. Yes. But let's talk about low-skilled migrants, because more often than not, we see they are the most attacked. And in the time of COVID-19, we've seen xenophobic attacks, racial discriminations, exacerbated by fake news and misinformation on coronavirus. Going forward, do you think that this would change the way people migrate?
Well, going forward, I really do not think that's going to change the way people migrate, because incidentally, as at March, we had a rescue ship that still had to rescue about 150 migrants on the high sea. Because now there's a migrant, we have migrants rescue vessels that go patrol the Mediterranean and try to rescue people or get them. Unfortunately, and with the COVID-19, you would have thought there would be a decline in people trying to migrate irregularly. But that's not been the case. Within this situation, people are still going. So when COVID-19 is all over, you can be very certain that the migration rates are going to increase, especially irregular migration rates. Because you're going to find that for developing countries or countries that were worst hit economically, people are going to want to move to where they feel that they'll get some sort of succor and they'll have better chances at survival. So to answer that question very succinctly, it's not going to go lower. It's not going to be any better. In fact, it's going to get worse. Because even right now, you find people still saying, if I can find my way to the high sea, I'm in Europe already. And how do you deal with that? How do you cope with those kind of mentalities and thoughts? The hardship is real in developing countries. We know how it is. We hear it all the time in Nigeria. We see how we've reacted to the palliative measures. We've seen all the outcry. We've seen the increase in crime. So imagine that people just think about how bad it is here in Nigeria and ask if anybody's going to want to stay after it's all over.
Very quickly, before we go, I would like to know your take on the recent executive order that was given by President Donald J. Trump, which basically stated that the entry of immigrants who present a risk to the United States labor markets during the economic recovery following the 2019 novel coronavirus outbreak was going to go into effect as of today. Now, I'm curious to know, what is your take on this kind of order in regards to migration of people from Nigeria, especially to the U.S., as we have one of the highest numbers?
Well, we do know that in terms of migration issues, we do know the opinion of President Trump, and we know that he's been very anti-migration. And it hasn't been a lot of people in a lot of countries and governments of the world have not particularly found the policies or his decisions very favorable to migrants. And so my take on that is that it's not going to be any better. It's not going to be easier. It's not a decision that's palatable or favorable to Nigerians. And so in this situation, what is going to be advocated for is what people are saying in different circles, and in migration circles is to look at other countries and other places where you may have better chances of getting a new life or being able to actually utilize your skills and get opportunities that work for you. If the US is not willing to really be migrant friendly, there are other places in the world. That's my take. That's not the only place in the world. See what China has done to us today. I mean, like, really. So let's really be factual. And I think that it's high time that Nigerians really begin to ask themselves and to look inwards and say, what do we take the skills that we have and develop our own country? Because at the end of the day, imagine if Nigeria was properly developed with the same skills, and we have been able to push for our government to take a stand and to do something. Look at the kind of crisis we're dealing with today, because the government hasn't particularly taken a good stand in the health sector, and then we're having this issue. So I think it's time for us as a citizen to push and utilize. So if US doesn't want us to come in, let's stay in our country and do better, or go elsewhere where we're wanted.
All right, I'd like to say a very big thank you to you for that. I mean, that's very thoughtful, and these are conversations we should have in the coming days, because definitely after COVID, everything will definitely change. I can tell you that.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here once again, Enitan. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.